What is up, guys? Welcome back to day 3, round 4 of the Vasilis Theodoridis International Chess Tournament here in Kavala, Greece. My name is Titus Tromavicius, I'm a Grandmaster, and I want to share my experiences and games with you from the event. So currently on the screen I have the round 3 pairings with the results, and as you can see I managed to win my game on board 1 after a very turbulent start to the game, outplay my opponent in one of the longest games of the day. Alongside it with 7 other players, I'm on a perfect score. And I got paired up on board 1 yet again against another talented junior, this time from Poland, Seemann Jakub, who's rated 2430 FIDE Master. And actually, I've played my opponent last year, almost exactly a year ago, in Prague. He was, I think, 2350 at the time. I had the white pieces, and I was slightly better at the opening. Then my opponent completely outplayed me in the middle game, and then eventually the game was drawn after I created some direct threats against my opponent's king. So definitely a player who's had experience, playing against stronger players and doing fairly well, myself included in that list. And I was white that game, and this game I got the black pieces, so it perfectly balances the colors each other out. And I was expecting my opponent to play more e4, to go for a more ambitious sort of setup, to try and really sort of put the pressure early on in the game, because I thought that he will look at my games and see that most of my losses this year and in previous years have been against e4. So I felt like that would make the most sense. I also briefly looked at d4 and would have followed my usual QGD setup, going for some Catalan with bishop b4 check most likely. My opponent instead sort of surprises me with 1 knight f3, and I'm immediately sort of taken back, and I'm feeling his nefarious intentions here a little bit. But I still obviously go for my usual setup with d5, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, e6, castles. And here I kind of rush a little bit, not really thinking about why my opponent might have, sort of tried to cook up here and play bishop e7. In retrospect, I probably should have tried to play for c5 and meet c4 with d4 and go for some sort of a ready setup, which I don't really have much experience in, but these positions are considered very fighting, I would say, at least in my experience. And a lot of things can happen in these positions, and definitely have chances with black to score, an important win. Instead, after bishop e7, my opponent plays c4, and now c5 would be met obviously with c takes d5, which would not be preferred for black. Whereas d4 could potentially be met by something like b4 even. So, it's a completely different sort of ball game than from the positions with c5 move order. So I don't really have much choice. I decide to castle. I'm still hoping my opponent might play b3, and then that would give me an option to play d4 yet again. I'm more familiar with these positions than I am with the d4 move prior. But my opponent, unfortunately for me, plays d4, and we get a Catalan setup in which, unfortunately, I didn't have the option of giving a check on b4, or even having an option of taking early on c4, for example. So my opponent has successfully limited my options in the opening, and I would say, he's definitely gotten the upper hand in the opening phase so far. But I have looked at this position, a few times. It's not like I'm unfamiliar with it, but I was starting to spend a lot of time. Obviously not here yet, but I played knight c6 rather. My opponent played knight bd2, and here I was trying to remember the exact setup that I have looked at before, and I managed to, after spending some 15-20 minutes, remember that this is the exact setup. Starting with e4, knight e6, somewhat a counterintuitive move. My opponent strikes in the center, and I just ignore it. But it has concrete ideas, and it does complete development, even if it's not in the most favorable way. Again, as we've established, the development is the most important thing in a chess game in the last few rounds. And after a3, c5, ed, this was still all I knew until this point. And then after b4, I knew that both knight c4 and knight e6 were both playable options. But that was it. I couldn't remember anything else after one of these two moves. So I played knight c4. And I was already about 20 minutes behind the clock. I decided to offer my opponent a draw to see, if he's in a fighting mood or not. I also think that these positions are very difficult to win with black in the first place. That's why I was kind of, again, tricked into this opening sequence that I was not really going to go for otherwise, because you could go for this setup basically anytime you want to against the Catalan. But unfortunately, again, I was sort of, my opponent sidestepped my preparation. So I decided to see what my opponent is thinking of the position, and he did decide to play on, which is good because this video would be very short otherwise. But at the same time, he also spent about 15-20 minutes. So at least I managed to equalize, the time advantage that my opponent had. My opponent decides to play bishop b2, which makes a lot of sense. And unfortunately for me, again, I couldn't remember exactly what I was supposed to play. And after 20 minutes thinking or so, I unfortunately played the wrong move. The correct move was to take on c4 first, to sort of relieve the tension a little bit, but also basically do the same thing I did, but there would no longer be a pin on this diagonal anymore after I trade on d2. In the game, I decided to take on d2 first because I still thought I was trying to remember some lines, and I got some deja vu feeling that this was correct, especially, like after knight d2. I remember looking at some lines where rook c8, my opponent plays queen f5, queen d7, and queen d7, knight d7, and I remember some lines where, again, if my opponent takes, I have some rook c2 ideas, I have some bishops f6 ideas, which trade the bishops, and this was completely wrong. This was not right. This was complete misremembering on my part. Completely different position, and my opponent has already a substantial advantage here about a pawn according to the computer. My opponent plays rook f1, which I think was one of the best moves. I decided to play rook f8. I rejected the bishop f6 because of takes, and rook e7, but according to the engine, this was the best option for black, even though I would have to defend passively after c takes d5 or c5. Both would be playable for white, and white still enjoys a healthy advantage. But apparently this position is not as bad as it looks, and still definitely playable. Instead, I decided to play rook f8 to match my opponent's rook developing move, but this move is completely wrong, and after cd, bishop f6, takes, my opponent here has a very nice resource, which both him and I missed, which is knight c4, basically developing the bishop and clearing the path for the rook to stand behind the pawn and support it on the d file. And white is probably just winning with best play, which is not surprising because he is a very healthy pawn up. Instead, my opponent decides to take on f6, which I'm very happy to see, obviously, because I thought this position was very close to a draw, and in fact it is. White's advantage has diminished, more than by half. So the evaluation is maybe 0.5 for white so far. Takes, rook d8, rook c1, back rank threat, obviously. Is my opponent's developing idea. Knight e8, corrals the pawn even further, and now my opponent, started thinking, kind of realizing that, his pawn is going to be falling in the next move most likely, or in the next few moves, and how should he go about giving it up. So I, during the game, thought that knight c4 was the best move. Computer is kind of unsure, he thinks both knight c4 and knight e4, which my opponent played in the game, are about equal strength, but what I was planning to do against knight c4 would have been completely wrong. I was planning to play king f8, which was not a great move at all. Computer suggestion is to play for b5, knight a5 and rook takes d6, but I thought this position was very, very ugly and very uncomfortable. And after rook e8, you also have to spot rook e6, which is quite an inhuman way to defend the pawn on e7, and basically white can eventually get some sort of position where he is a pawn up, but his knight is somewhat trapped. So apparently this position should be very close to a draw, even though usually in the knight endgames, if you're a pawn up, the position is treated similarly as in pawn endgames. But again, my opponent's knight is kind of misplaced. I will have an active king on d5, and the position should be drawn with perfect play potentially. But you have to spot this inhuman rook a6 move, which I did see in my calculations, but I didn't think it was as good as the computer suggests. Instead, my opponent played knight e4, which I think, even though maybe it's the same level of strength as knight c4, sort of makes my task much easier, because my moves are basically forced. I have to play f5, knight g5, h6. I chase my opponent's knight away. So basically what my opponent has managed to accomplish is he's created some weaknesses in my position where his knight can go to and exploit these squares. But I do win my pawn back eventually. My opponent plays knight d4, which is the best move. and I managed to find a nice little defensive move, rook d7, and from this point onward, my opponent couldn't really cause me any more serious problems, and after a few more moves, the game fizzled out into a draw. So definitely a tough defensive task. I kind of misplayed the middle game, I would say. The opening I managed to remember more or less spot on, but then I forgot the middle game ideas that I've looked at, a while ago, and misplayed the move order. I took on d2 one move too soon. Got into a lot of trouble. Then my opponent failed to find the most direct way to apply pressure, and I think I made a pretty good defensive task at the end there, where I defended pretty well with rook d7, and the game was in fact drawn. So 3.5 out of 4, not too bad, but a bit of a worrying trend. Like I was lost last game with the white pieces in the exchange Slav. Now I'm under some serious pressure here in the Catalan. So I feel like the game quality has dipped a little bit. So let's hope I can turn it around tomorrow with the white pieces. And that game's recap is going to be available probably tomorrow in the morning. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you all then.